Hi, Anne.
Hey Irene, what's up?
What's up? Let's start off by introducing ourselves. I can go. My name's Irene Van. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm from San Jose, California, currently living in Santa Clara. And I am a drama therapist, a facilitator, a poet, and performer. And I don't know, just a Bay Area artist. Who knows? I don't know. What about you?
Yes, I love it. Hey everyone, my name is Anne Bui, pronouns she, her, also from San Jose and currently still living in San Jose. I'm a social work student right now and also a artist, mostly creating art through writing and poems, but also exploring other mediums these days like reels and whatever else comes along that interests me. So yeah, we're here to talk about our art pieces from the QTViệt showcase back in 2021, I believe, over Zoom. And diving into it. So the first question we want to explore is what was like the inspirations or cultures or healing elements of our pieces that we wanted to express. So Irene, I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, so for me, I had two poems that I was exploring around what it meant to be non-binary and what it would look like. The first poem, A Box of a Home, was really exploring my relationship to like building family or building a house or a home with like my family or with at the time my partner, and what it would mean for me to really include my gender experience and my queerness and be fully accepted within that, and whether I even really needed to kind of follow that sort of heteronormative track of owning a home and having children and all those things, and whether I already have home from the
Mm,
people that I have built community with.
yeah.
And and then the second poem was really deeply personal after a breakup I had with a cisgender straight partner, um, and this really transphobic breakup that we had, and it really shook me to the core, I guess. And I think through QTViệt Healing Circle, it was like, what is going to provide me healing? And I think I needed to write some sort of love letter to myself, to pull myself out of that sort of internalized transphobia. So it's more like an affirmation to myself. Um, yeah, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
in the end, it was always grounded in community. I think community has always supported me to feel comfortable in my gender and sexuality and being Viet. And so I think a lot of those elements came through from that. Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I love just thinking back to your poems and just what a fierce love letter to yourself, right? That second one was. And I just still remember like watching you perform it and just like screaming in Tracy's garage where we like
Oh,
watched it together. And yeah, I think just like really excited to witness that and excited to see if there's more poetry or things like that that come from those intentions for you.
for sure. Thank you. What about you, Anne? What's been your inspiration?
Yeah, so my poem for the showcase was just one poem, Something, what does the river think? And it was like a lot of these questions I had been holding for a long time about like what does it mean to like be like Vietnamese American, to be queer and Catholic? Like how do I like reconcile those contradictions or like how am I living with them? And also this imagery of water in the river, which I feel very connected to imagery of water. I think as like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a water rooster, maybe it's just because I love the water. But yeah, that poem is very much like I wanted to mix in like kind of this folktale sense of like a story about a girl by a river, but then also like memoir in the sense of like me like trying to figure out those identities, or like maybe realizing that I don't need to fit in either or that I don't have to fit into other people's expectations of what it means to be any and all of those things. So that was very much, I think, the intentions of that poem, and like what I wanted to release out into the world is that, yeah, I don't know, that it's like okay to be like the type of queer where you're like bisexual or pansexual, and also to be the type of queer that does feel spiritually nourished by traditional religion, while also like being a person of the diaspora, right? And I still don't think that poem answers a lot of the questions that like one may have with those identities, but I think it's a starting point to accepting that, to kind of allow that deeper reflection.
Right.
So that's what I think about that poem.
Yeah, I love that, Anne. And I always really appreciate um the themes that you explore in your poetry, because I think a lot of it is not talked about enough. Like, what does it mean to be queer and to be spiritual? And I think a lot of people have a hard time with that. And I see the way that you write about it, where you can hold a lot of truths in your poetry. And I love the idea of like weaving in folklore because it's so Vietnamese, you know,
Yeah.
like yeah, it's like such a storyteller through that poetry, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely leaning on our ancestors for the storytelling bits that we get to like embody and practice in this lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. I love to ask this question because we're both poets.
Mhm.
What is it about poetry that you really love that has drawn you to it?
Yeah. My like love story with poetry really begins with spoken word poetry and seeing um yeah, just seeing two friends perform the poem like When Love Arrives by Phil K and Sarah K, and just like loving that dynamic of spoken word poetry, but then also of like a dual poem, and just how like I don't know, just how alive poetry is. And I think prior to that, like my study of poetry was very text-based, which I also think is beautiful, but I don't think
Mm.
it really like came alive for me until I experienced spoken word poetry. And from then, like it just felt like such an incredible medium for me to express myself, and mainly to really, I think, practice the conversations that I want to have with people in my life, but I don't know how to yet. And so I like put it in a poem. And
Mm.
like that was, yeah, I feel like that's very much like a lot of my poems are kind of conversations that I'm hoping to have. Um, or like, yeah, things that I want to simmer on and keep fleshing out. What about for you?
Yeah, I think very similar that like in high school I was like I hated English class. Like it was my least one of my least favorite classes because we were reading so many like old white people and then
Yeah.
yeah, and then going to college and meeting and going to these poetry slams and seeing how powerful they were. I think it made me realize that poetry didn't have to look a particular way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started going to poetry for the people class at Cal, and that kind of like broke open things for me. And I love that poetry, while there is form, there's also so much flexibility, right? In how you
Mm-hmm.
write and the metaphors that you can bring up. Like I love getting lost in people's imagery, you know, and so
Yes.
and the specificity of a memory that comes up for people. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I love about poetry, and also like incorporating Viet words and stuff like that. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know you do that too. So that's really
Yes. I've been loving that more, like showing up more proud to be bilingual in my art, right?
yeah, for
That's really
sure.
powerful. Yeah. How do you feel about your piece now that it's been like out in the world like for a little over a year now, or kind of like what reactions or affirmations have you received from your pieces?
Yeah, it's a trip because I think when I wrote it, I didn't have any intent of like, oh, I need to put it out for anybody else to really like absorb.
Right.
I don't know. I think it was just such a personal poem. It's just trying to like, showcase a poem that I was working through, and it was overwhelming the response that I got, particularly from like non-binary and trans friends. And
Mm.
that really helped me feel more affirmed in who I was as well. And I think it was also the first time that I was really announcing publicly more so around my gender experience and the things that I'm thinking around. And stepping stone into like, yes, I can like explore my gender more, and I will do it through clothing, and I can consider other methods and hormones and things like that. And I think it was allowing myself to admit it to myself and then like give myself permission to explore it in community. So I think it was a huge part of my gender journey, I think, and continues to be. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that your pieces serve to bring more people together, like bring people in your circle together, and not only serve as a love letter for you, but like a love letter for so many people you love too. That's so powerful.
Thanks, Anne. What about you? Where are you at?
Yeah, so where am I at with this poem? I was just, yeah, thinking about how I love this poem as like that first step to kind of like thinking about all those different identities. And since putting it out in the world, I'm really excited because it got accepted to be forthcoming in the inaugural Viet Seattle anthology. So it's just like really exciting to be in this artist community with other Korean trans Viet and to see this poem like continue to, yeah, get to travel to new places and like encounter new audiences.
Yeah.
And like I think I'm still yeah, looking forward to see like what other reactions it may get from people. But from like the show, I just remember like folks sharing with me like how beautiful it was or like how they appreciated it, and like hearing my parents say that it was good, which was like great, like very like okay, much like detail, but thank you.
Say more.
Okay, but it's cool too to I think in a way like there was that coming out process as queer to my parents, right? But there's also this coming out process as an artist to my parents, or like coming out like different coming out processes of like who I really am or my interests and things. And so I feel like very much so like inviting them to this showcase and like other showcases prior to that too, or inviting them to witness my art is like me being very brave and courageous, and also like me starting to invite them into like who I am and to witness all of that.
Yeah, that's super brave, and I feel like being able to invite them to your show is incredible and courageous, and also just like submitting your poetry to a lot of different places. Like that's a whole nother level of commitment to your art. So it's like I
Yeah.
feel like you're paving the way for the rest. I'm like, okay, yeah, like you did
I
it. I
know.
could, one day
You
I
can do it, everyone. You can do it.
can.
Definitely.
For sure. So lastly, I guess like where is your healing headed or your artistry?
Mm-hmm.
What are you inspired by or creating these days or thinking about for the future?
Yes. These days, I'm really inspired by, I think, just like creating that book that does serve as a guide to people who may like live similar experiences or identities to me, that they have that. Because when I was younger, like I always wish there was like a how-to guide to live my life, right, as this like diasporic like Vietnamese American like refugee like queer Catholic person, even though like I didn't come into my queerness until my adulthood. But like still I think there were so many of these like how to's I wish I knew, or like lessons that I know now that I wish I knew when I was going through so much like heartache and struggle in my young years. And so
Mm.
that's what really inspires me, is finally putting that out there, like through a book of like poetry and prose. Yeah, and I think what inspires me is just like all the amazing like artists and poets that are already out there creating and doing that work, and I'm really drawing from them. So that's my intention and hopes to do that. And what about you?
I'm excited for your survival guide. I would like
Yes.
that, please. Thank you. Yeah. For myself, I think right now we're in another round of QTViệt Circle for Healers and Artists, and it's honestly been a struggle for me to write lately. But I know that usually something will come from working on my healing first. And I'm really working on like healing through some really hard, like intergenerational trauma stuff with my folks. And I'm hoping that that guides me. And I'm trying to lean into like what has been healing. And so what I have known is dancing and movement. And I've been obsessed with Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And so I know that it's like this beautiful poetic lullaby with nature. And so right now I'm kind of in this process of just figuring out how does those three things come together. And I really want to experiment with going back to my first love of theater.
Yes.
So we'll see. We'll see. I think I'm trying to be calm with the process of not knowing and then just going from there. But those are some of the things I'm working on, I guess.
I love it. It's so exciting. Like just being able to try out, experiment with these different art forms, and also what you're saying about like the healing allows way for like you to express yourself. I think that's so true and like so important, right? To allow ourselves to have that space to heal rather than just constantly distracting ourselves or putting it on the back burner. So I really love you sharing that for your process.
For sure, thanks.
Well, that's all the questions that we have to answer today, folks.
Yes.
So tune in. There's going to be more interviews with other artists from the circle in the coming weeks here. So listen in, get to know folks, and stay connected with us on QTViệt Cafe.
Check us out.
Bye.